Hello, I'm Arif Fahrudin. Welcome to Asian Agribiz podcast. More feed companies are paying attention to their impact on the environment. But first, we need to measure what this impact is. This is where the nonprofit Global Feed Life Cycle Institute comes in, an independent animal nutrition and food industry institute with the purpose of developing publicly available animal nutrition LCA database to support environmental assessments in the industry. My colleague Zahra Imtiaz talks to Laura Nobel and Ariane Voetman of the Institute to find out more about LCA and why they will be important for feed millers in Asia.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for coming into our podcast today. It's great to have you here. Before we start, Laura, can you give us a brief introduction about who you are and what the institute we are going to discuss actually today, that is the Global Feed Life Cycle Assessment Institute, what it is all about. So before we dive down into that, if you can give you an introduction about yourself, and then Aryan.
Yes. Hi, Sarah. Nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting us to our this podcast. My name is Laura Nobel, and I'm a project coordinator at the service provider company Agribusiness Service. So we do all-round management for a multitude of our clients. But one of them is the Global Feed LCA Institute, which is a nonprofit entity under US laws, which is created by and for the feed industry to tackle the demand for data on emissions and life cycle assessment. But we'll dive into that more. So I've been working for the GFLI and also for Agribusiness Service for 2 years now.
Thank you. And you, Aaron, tell us about yourself.
Well, to echo Laura, thank you, Sarah, for having us in this podcast. My name is Arjen Fortman. Been working at Agribusiness Service for 4 years almost. Oh no, a bit more, to be honest. Since 2021, owner of Agribusiness Service, and related to that as director of that company, also involved with GFLI as operational director. So together with Laura and our other colleague Delaney, we run this GFLI secretariat to help feed companies have better insights on data on carbon footprint emissions. So that's our major thing at what we do in this context.
Thank you for that. So Laura, can you tell us what GFLI is about and what is the concept behind its inception?
Yes, of course. Already said a little bit about it, that it stands for we usually always call it the GFLI, which stands for the Global Feed LCA Institute. In 2019, it was officially created, and that was done after a large project to facilitate some of these data points that are also still in the database. It's mainly coming from the discipline of the life cycle assessment, which is a form of data collection throughout the whole life cycle of a product. So you go from cradle to gate, and the idea was for GFLI to have a methodology that is used on a global scale, that is aligned with other guidelines, such as the FAO LEAP guidelines, which is also a globally set guidelines for this kind of LCA work, and also the EU PEFCR, which stands for the Product Environmental Foods Category Rules, which is also guidelines on how to set up an LCA specifically for feed. Kind of the idea of it is that if we can have a database that has a lot of this kind of data, and it's all for feed and everyone can use it, then we have a unified or a uniform database and data sets that everyone can use, also for downstream partners, so that everyone measures with the same kind of numbers, and are not using other kind of methodologies, because in that case you cannot compare two different LCAs if they don't have the exact same methodology.
So I think Aryan can also jump in here, but like you speak about data points, what kind of data are these? I mean, to our audience, if you were to simplify it, what exactly are you measuring and why is it important for the feed sector?
It's all feed ingredients. So we have 3 types of products in there right now. So one of them is cultivated ingredients, which has you call the system boundary. So the system boundary is until farm. So feed ingredients are created on a farm. They're grown on land or in horticulture or in a greenhouse, it's called. And they that's one product. Then you also have products that are dried, so it's also cultivated products that have one extra step of drying, so then it's at storage. And lastly, you also have processed products, and that's any type of, well, it doesn't have to be a cultivated product then, but it still has this processing part, such as soybean meal or any type of product that goes to a feed mill to be further processed.
And what kind of data do you take from these ingredients? Is it the quality or the carbon emissions and it's while it's being grown, or if you can explain further?
Yes, as we follow the FAO LEAP and the EU PEFCR guidelines, they both have a system of first you have the major thing, and that's what people mostly use to now calculate their footprints, is the carbon footprint as we know it. So it's the global warming potential, or the emissions in CO2 equivalents. And this is also divided into 4 or 5 now emission factors regarding the global warming potential. So you have also land use change is one of those major key issues, because a lot of questions are regarding if you can measure a carbon footprint with or without land use change. And land use change is the idea that within a set time something has happened to the soil or to the land that has changed it. So if you go from a forest and you make it into arable land, this is called land use change. But it can also be, of course, if you have a grassland and then you make it into arable land. And the other factors for this global warming potential is also peat oxidation. So that's the emissions coming from peat soil lands. And we also have a distinction between the methane production through the biogenic emissions or the fossil fuels. And then we also, besides the most used carbon footprint, then you also have about 19 impact categories, which is based on the toxicity for the environment, for humans, and I think also for water.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is your database can tell us if we're going to use a certain type of ingredient, what its carbon footprint is.
Yes, correct. Yeah, with the feed ingredient sets, a feed mill could, for example, use or link them to the products they actually use, and then make an averaged carbon footprint based on the products they use or the feed ingredients that they use into, for example, a feed pellet or any other type of products.
I just want to jump in a bit more on what Laura describes on the technical aspects of the database. I think that you asked more also a question on why GFLI is important. I think that this initiative is based on the feed sector, which is very well aware of the fact that they can improve on carbon footprint emissions. They also know that they have an impact throughout the entire value chain on food, for example. So what eventually GFLI would allow this sector is that they already are working very hard on reduction of environmental footprint, but with this database they can have it very explicit with numbers, so they can explain to downstream partners that they are willing to work on all the emission goals and assure that they are a sector which is important in reduction of carbon footprint and also have like a very high impact to all the consumer level products. So I think that's one of the major goals as well.
So you guys help the feed industry kind of quantify the emissions or their contribution towards emissions for global warming.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are two sides on that. One is to inform their downstream partners, and the other is that they can also see their own development related to their products. So you can just see whether you're able to reduce your own carbon footprint emissions throughout a couple of years, for example. And with one just standard as GFLI provides, you are able to compare, which allows you to give some kind of a multi-year lookout.
Sure. And can anyone be part of GFLI?
Yes, we welcome anyone who uses or finds value in the GFLI database to become members. Of course, now we still see that most of our members are actually feed companies because they are most often using the database, and they also see, of course, how the sector is developing in this sense, also what Arjan already said. But yeah, we accept any stakeholders, and as GFLI, we're also looking into more strategic partnerships, relevant parties, for example, research institute and universities, how we can combine the knowledge that they have and also the database that we have to, for example, increase data generation or increase uptake of the database.
Okay. You spoke a lot about LCAs. I think if we are to talk in simple terms, why is an LCA so important right now, especially if we're talking about sustainability in the feed business?
Well, the LCA is just one metric of quantifying emissions in some sort of structured way. For feed companies, it's relatively easy when they link the GFLI database with their feed formulation software, for example. I think it is relevant because LCA is such a structured manner. I don't think it's the only way to quantify all emissions, and of course, you always have to make concessions with quantifying things if you do it in a structured way. But I think LCA is quite helpful for the first push for companies to what we see with our database, for example, is average data. And I think it's also a push towards linking it towards their own primary data to get the best kind of insight on your emissions. And I think certainly if you want to look into improving your carbon footprint, this kind of insight on data is very important. And this kind of benchmarking, this is also what Arjan mentioned before, of benchmarking it against your own data from the past, for example, or benchmarking against the average data. It could be really helpful to see how you've improved and where are the main factors where you could improve as a company regarding to your emission.
Can you tell us about the challenges? I think you mentioned it's really difficult to get accurate and robust data. So what are the current challenges you are facing in building this database?
I see it as a two-way street. So I think for people that have data or want to do a data project to get their data into the database, I do see some hurdles for this. I think a data project is quite intense. LCA is quite an exercise because you have to do because you have to collect the data, of course, from the starting process until the end of it. So the life cycle. And what we see, at least with a lot of data providers, is how we call them, that they also have to link back to their suppliers, of course, because they have the actual product. But the problem is that most suppliers don't, or are not yet fully included into the story of getting this kind of data. So it just takes a lot of time to also bring them along in the story of data collection, and to make sure that also their data that they're providing is also, of course, of the right quality. So the rightful data collection, I think, is one big part of this, because it just takes a lot of time, and it can also be quite expensive, of course. If, for example, also with the data project, because we have average data, you want it to be representable towards that type of product. So you would also need to have, you cannot just go to one farm and calculate this number and say that it's an average for the country, for example. So you would need to have multiple farms, farm data collected, averaged out. So yeah, it does require specific expertise, also from the LCA consultant who's working on a specific product, because cultivated ingredients, for example, is it's quite a different process when you think about which kind of data you need to collect as compared to, for example, feed additive that's created in a factory, for example. So I think that's the main thing coming from the data provider. And from a GFLI perspective, I think this is also a hurdle, of course, because it takes a lot of time. It also costs quite a lot. So it's quite difficult on this level to get industry data. And as GFLI, we're trying to continually improve our systems. We're also working on getting a satisfactory budget available for new data. And this will mainly come from the amount of memberships we have. So this is one reason why we also really push for membership, because in this way, it's the best sense of supporting the GFLI and making us, or giving us, the kind of investments that we need to get new data. So yeah, so from our sides, we do see some hurdles of actually getting this kind of getting more data in a structured manner and as quick as possible, because we do see that the database still has some we still have a lot of ground to cover when it comes to data sets. And yeah, and it goes from a lot of data missing. For example, in Asia, we don't have any data, or we don't have much data coming from there. But we also see from European users that they require like very specific data sets that are currently not in there. So it's, yeah, we do see the ways of improving the database.
Finally, just to wrap up, for Asian feed millers and our audience in this region, I mean, we don't have the regulation like Europe to force people to like, so to kind of look at sustainability and things like that. But how can they benefit from contributing to your database and kind of adopting some of these assessments?
Yeah, I think so. That I think also there are two steps here. One is we would definitely like to have the data available in the database. So if they can contribute with having raw material data, we would really invite them to have contact with us and see whether we can help them get data in GFLI matter. Because if they are able to provide that data, then it might be that customers who are in Europe, or maybe feed mill producers who produce in Europe, they want to have the data because they have like regulations, for example. So if there are people who are willing to provide data, they're more than welcome to have contact with us and to see whether we can help them get that data. On the other hand, I think that there might not be regulations at this moment in Asia, for example, but I think that the entire world is well aware of that. We have like an obligation to work on sustainability and to improve environmental footprinting. So in the end, I think that this will come to Asia at one point. So it's better, I think, to be a front runner than to just stay behind and see what's going to happen. I think that people who are front runners, they can benefit both in financial way, but also in like a good feeling about your impact on the environment. So I think there are two ways, and we'd really just like to invite all companies who are interested, just reach out to GFLI and see whether we can or help them with getting data, or attract them to invite them and discuss with them how you could also benefit from GFLI related to financials or whatsoever. So just an open discussion, but I think there's a really a value for companies to be working on LCAs and environmental impact, both business-wise as also in just thinking throughout the value chain and be aware of your impact.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Arjen.
I hope that was informative. And now you know how better to get your data for a more accurate LCA assessment. Thank you for listening to another episode of Asian Agribiz Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts to keep up to date on the latest happenings in the animal protein industry in Asia.